My wife cried, "Why are you so cold? You never touch me." I smirked and said, "I don't like sharing toys." Then I cast the Ring camera footage of her sneaking her coworker in while I was at work onto the living room TV. She tried to cover the screen in panic. I, 34 male, am a fairly analytical guy who likes keeping things organized, and I bought my 4-bedroom suburban house exactly 5 years before wife, 32 female, and I got married. The deed and the mortgage are strictly in my name. When we tied the knot 3 years ago, we agreed on a clean, fair financial system. She handled the daily utilities, groceries, and her own car payment from our joint account. My salary covered the heavy lifting, meaning the mortgage, property taxes, home insurance, and major repairs. It was an equitable split, and for the first couple of years, we lived comfortably. She never cared about the paperwork or the equity. That is, until about 8 months ago. Her entire behavior completely shifted. She started coming home late from her corporate logistics job, consistently walking through the door well past 8 at night. She claimed her department was undergoing a massive internal restructuring, and the workload had doubled. But along with the late hours came an aggressive, persistent demand that we refinance the house. She argued that interest rates were shifting and we desperately needed to pull out $120,000 in equity to renovate the kitchen and bathrooms to increase our property value. I told her the house absolutely did not need a remodel. The appliances were modern, the countertops were granite, and the layout was perfect. But she wouldn't drop it. She started bringing home glossy brochures from this specific contracting company, insisting we sign a preliminary agreement to secure a spot on their waitlist. Simultaneously, our joint account started bleeding. I monitor our finances closely, keeping a detailed spreadsheet of our monthly overhead. I began noticing highly unusual cash withdrawals and digital transfers. $500 transferred out on a Tuesday, $800 withdrawn at an ATM on a Friday. When I confronted her about the discrepancies, she got immediately defensive. She claimed inflation was hitting our grocery runs harder than expected, and the rest was going toward upfront material deposits for the contractor she was determined to hire. Let me tell you, groceries do not cost an extra $1,000 a month for 2 people. The secrecy was thick, and the math did not add up. I decided to install a discreet indoor Ring camera right on the top shelf of our living room bookcase, sandwiched between some old books. In my state, you only need single-party consent to record conversations in your own home, and legally, there is zero reasonable expectation of privacy in a shared, open living room. I told myself I was just setting up a security measure for potential break-ins, but my gut knew exactly what I was hunting for. It took exactly 4 days to get my answer. I was at my office, reviewing quarterly spreadsheets, when my phone pushed a motion sensor notification from the Ring app. I opened it, expecting to see the mail carrier through the front window. Instead, there was wife, walking through the front door at 2 in the afternoon. Walking in right behind her was a man I instantly recognized from her company's holiday parties. Coworker. They didn't just walk in. They were completely intertwined, hands all over each other. They collapsed onto my living room couch. I sat frozen at my desk, watching my life unravel in real time, high definition. But what they said next was far worse than the physical betrayal. Wife sat up, adjusting her blouse, and poured 2 glasses of my expensive bourbon from the bar cart. She handed him one and said, "He is being so stubborn about the refinance. I might have to threaten to divorce him to force his hand. If I pack a bag, he will panic and sign." Coworker took a sip, leaning back like he owned the place. "You need to get him to sign the papers by the end of the month. The LLC is ready to go. Once the bank wires the equity funds to our contractor account, I can finally clear my debts, and we can be done with him for good." I sat in my office chair, the blood rushing in my ears. They weren't just having an affair. They were plotting a systematic financial extraction. They intended to pull my hard-earned equity, funnel it into a fake contracting company, and leave me holding a massive mortgage debt. The very next morning, I took a personal day from work and called lawyer. I explained the entire situation, provided the raw Ring video footage, and laid out the financial documents and bank statements I had gathered overnight. Lawyer was incredibly thorough. We immediately pulled the state business registry records for the contracting company wife had been aggressively pushing. The registered agent for the LLC was Coworker. He had incorporated the shell company 3 months prior, right around the exact time wife started demanding the home refinance. This significantly elevated the situation. As lawyer explained, this wasn't just standard cheating. This was a documented conspiracy to commit wire fraud, coupled with severe dissipation of marital assets. My house is separate, premarital property, meaning it is legally safe from standard equitable distribution. However, her actively siphoning money from our joint checking account to fund this scheme gave us massive leverage. We immediately drafted the petition for divorce, citing breach of fiduciary duty. We also prepared a formal, legally compliant 30-day notice to vacate the premises. Because the house was solely my property, I had the absolute right to evict her, but I still had to follow strict state tenant laws to avoid an illegal lockout, which could work against me in family court. While lawyer prepared the necessary court documents, wife heavily escalated her tactics at home. She realized I was deliberately stalling on the bank appointments for the refinance. Her entitlement flared into outright, daily hostility. She started manufacturing loud arguments out of thin air, clearly trying to build a narrative of me being an aggressive husband. She would follow me from the kitchen to the garage, jabbing her finger at my chest, demanding I sign the loan documents. "You are financially abusing me by keeping my name off this house," she screamed one evening, intentionally raising her voice toward the open windows. "I am your wife. I am legally entitled to half of everything you own. If you do not call the loan officer tomorrow, I am taking half. Your retirement, I am taking the cars, and I am leaving you." I just looked at her, strictly practicing the gray rock method lawyer had advised. I simply told her I needed more time to review the fluctuating interest rates in a flat tone. She sneered, telling me I was pathetic and had absolutely no idea how to provide for a family. She began intentionally damaging small things around the house. She would drag her heavy boots across the hardwood floors to create scratches. She left water pooling on the expensive bathroom vanity to warp the wood. She was intentionally creating fake wear and tear to justify her urgent need for the contractor. By the end of the week, she moved her clothes to the guest bedroom, explicitly stating she would not sleep in the same bed as me or show me any affection until the refinance papers were signed and notarized. It was a clumsy, desperate power play. I used the silence and privacy to finalize everything with lawyer. By Tuesday afternoon, I had the execution copy of the divorce petition and the formal eviction notice secured in a heavy manila folder, sitting directly on the kitchen island. That Tuesday evening, she came home early. She noticed the thick folder sitting on the island, but didn't know what it contained. She was visibly agitated, pacing around the kitchen. Coworker must have been heavily pressuring her about his mounting debts and the strict timeline of the LLC payout. She walked into the living room where I was sitting comfortably on the couch, reviewing an email on my phone. She stood directly in front of the television, intentionally blocking my view, and tightly crossed her arms. She decided to play the ultimate victim card, rapidly switching her tactic from aggressive hostility to a pathetic, calculated attempt at emotional manipulation. She let out a dramatic, forced sigh, squeezing out a few fake tears that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Why are you so cold?" she cried, her voice trembling with manufactured hurt and exhaustion. "You never touch me anymore. You barely even look at me. Don't you care about us at all? Don't you want to build a secure future together?" I looked up from my phone screen. I didn't feel anger anymore. I didn't feel sorrow. I just felt absolute, crystal clear disgust for the person standing in front of me. I smirked and said, "I don't like sharing toys." Her brow furrowed in deep confusion. The fake tears stopped instantly. What on earth are you talking about?" I didn't answer her with words. I simply opened the Ring application on my phone, selected the saved, high-definition video file from 4 days ago, and tapped the casting icon. The 75-inch living room TV instantly switched inputs. The screen flashed black for a fraction of a second before illuminating the dimly lit room with the crisp video. The soundbar volume was set to 50. Suddenly, The unmistakable sound of Coworker's voice echoed loudly through the room. Asterisk, you need to get him to sign the papers by the end of the month. The LLC is ready. Asterisk. Wife froze completely. The color drained from her face so fast, she looked physically ill. She whipped her head around to look at the massive screen. There she was, sitting on the very couch I was currently occupying, pouring my expensive bourbon for the man she was actively conspiring with.
Panic set in.
Pure, unadulterated panic. She lunged forward toward the entertainment center, physically trying to cover the massive screen with her arms, spreading her hands wide as if hiding the pixels would somehow erase the reality of the situation. Turn it off, she shrieked, frantically clawing at the bottom bezel of the TV to find the manual power button. Turn it off right now. That is fake. You are illegally spying on me. You can't do this. Single-party consent state, I said, my voice dangerously calm, cutting through her hysteria. And there is absolutely no expectation of privacy in a common living area. Keep watching. It gets significantly better. The video played on relentlessly. Her own voice filled the room, loud and clear. Asterisk, once the bank wires the equity funds, we can finally be done with him. Asterisk. She gave up on the television and lunged aggressively across the coffee table for my phone. I stood up quickly, easily sidestepping her frantic grasp. Sit down, I commanded, my tone leaving absolutely no room for debate. She stumbled backward, hyperventilating, her hands shaking wildly. I can explain everything.
It is not what it looks like.
It was a stupid joke. We were just talking hypothetically. You were orchestrating wire fraud and embezzling marital funds, I corrected her coldly. I walked over to the kitchen island, picked up the manila folder, walked back, and tossed it onto the glass coffee table right in front of her knees. That is a formal petition for divorce. Attached to it is a legally binding 30-day notice to vacate the premises. You will sleep in the guest room. You will not touch a single one of my belongings. If you attempt to damage this house further, I will immediately have you arrested for criminal vandalism. She didn't go quietly. Her deep-seated entitlement completely blinded her to the legal reality of her situation. She stubbornly refused to sign the acknowledgement of service. Instead, she immediately pulled out her phone and called the police, hysterically claiming to the dispatcher that I was physically threatening her and trying to illegally throw her out onto the street. 2 uniformed officers arrived 10 minutes later, lights flashing in my driveway. She practically threw the front door open, sobbing uncontrollably, playing the terrified victim to perfection. I politely invited the officers inside, remained perfectly calm, and handed them my driver's license, the registered deed to the house proving sole ownership, and the stamped 30-day notice to vacate. I then pulled out my iPad and showed them the Ring camera footage. The officer stood in my living room and watched the video of her casually plotting financial fraud. Then they looked back at her. Her fake tears had instantly dried up. Ma'am, the older officer said, his tone entirely flat and unimpressed. This is a civil matter. He owns the property and is following the legal eviction process to the letter. We highly suggest you stay in a separate room tonight to keep the peace. If we have to come back to this address because you are escalating a domestic disturbance, someone is leaving in handcuffs, and I assure you it will not be him. She retreated to the guest room in absolute, stunned silence. The very next day, I executed the final, most devastating phase of the plan. During lawyers' deep dive investigation into Coworker's fraudulent LLC, we found out a lot more about Coworker himself. He wasn't some wealthy, independent bachelor. He was drowning in massive, hidden gambling debts, and more importantly, he was married. His wife happened to be the senior HR director at the exact same corporate logistics company where wife and Coworker worked. I drafted a highly professional, concise email. I attached the state business registry documents proving Coworker owned the fake contracting LLC. I attached the highlighted bank statements showing wife transferring company bonus money into that specific LLC. Finally, I attached the clear video file of them on my couch. I sent the email directly to Coworker's wife at her direct work address. The corporate and personal fallout was catastrophic for them. By 2 in the afternoon that exact same day, Both wife and coworker were publicly escorted out of their office building by building security. Coworker's wife, acting strictly in her official capacity as HR director, flagged their actions as a severe violation of company ethics and initiated an investigation for potential corporate embezzlement, terminating them both with cause immediately. She then filed for divorce from coworker the very next morning, utilizing her own legal team to freeze all of his remaining joint assets. Wife was suddenly entirely unemployed, facing an impending eviction, and staring down a heavily documented divorce where she had absolutely zero leverage. She desperately hired a cheap, strip mall attorney who tried to file a Hail Mary motion for temporary spousal support, claiming she was destitute and accustomed to a certain lifestyle. Lawyer absolutely destroyed it in mediation. We presented the airtight evidence of the LLC fraud and the calculated dissipation of the joint accounts. Lawyer looked across the conference table and gave her attorney a very simple, non-negotiable ultimatum. Your client signs the final decree today, permanently waiving all rights to alimony and any absurd claim to the property equity. As part of this settlement, to avoid further legal action, she voluntarily waives the remainder of her 30-day notice and legally vacates the premises by this Friday at noon. If she refuses, we walk out of this room, submit the fraud evidence directly to the district attorney for criminal charges, and file a civil suit against her for the stolen joint funds. Her attorney reviewed the documents, turned to her, and bluntly advised her to take the deal to stay out of prison. Defeated, pale, and shaking, she signed everything. She packed her bags that Thursday afternoon under my watchful eye. Coworker had completely abandoned her, absolutely desperate to salvage his own disastrous, bankrupting legal battle with his ex-wife. Wife moved her belongings into a cramped, month-to-month studio apartment in a terrible part of town, completely stripped of the comfortable, secure life she felt so incredibly entitled to steal from me. I kept the house. I kept my equity. And most importantly, I kept my peace of mind. Sometimes, letting the trash take itself out simply isn't enough. Occasionally, you have to bag it up, tie a tight knot, and put it on the curb yourself. If you enjoyed watching sheer entitlement meet the unforgiving concrete wall of consequence, hit subscribe. Because the only thing I share less than my toys is my patience for betrayal.